Fishing a lake with crayfish, particularly if you've never done it before, can be a little bit of a head scratcher at times. So here are my top tips for when fishing waters that are full of the dreaded crays. Now, crayfish can be extremely annoying at times, but there is just a few really simple methods where you can alleviate your problems completely, and you can just make sure that your rigs are presented all the time and you've got some form of bait and attraction left on your hook. Now, the first thing with regards to rigs, whichever rigs you use, obviously I use the Ronnie rig, don't I? But whatever rig you use, you always need to make sure that that rig has resetting properties, because they are going to be pulling at it all of the time. Now, with regards to my rig, yes, it is just a Ronnie rig, but instead of a soft coated braid, I am using a fluorocarbon. Now, with regards to that fluorocarbon, I definitely wouldn't recommend something like a stiff boom or a chod rig material, because they are pulling at it. Potentially you could end up with basically kinks on the actual rig. Now, at the moment, I'm getting away with fluorocarbon with no kinks in there at all, and that's just always going to reset no matter how much, obviously, they are pulling at your hook bait. Now, another alternative, if you are beginning to get kinks in your fluorocarbon, maybe the crayfish are extremely ravenous, you could move over to something like a coated hook link, but again, I would use a stiff coated hook link, and our stiff coated hook link is perfect for that, because it's not massively stiff that it is going to kink. So yeah, whichever rigs you are using, just make sure that you're using some form of stiff material to make sure that that's reset. Now, just a little thing with regards to the Ronnie rig as well, obviously if you are using a Ronnie rig, definitely don't use a hook rigger or a kicker or anything like that, because they will pull that off. Just use shrink tube, and obviously they can't pull the hook off or anything as well. I am actually using a little bit of tungsten there, and I am getting away with it absolutely fine. Obviously, if they are removing your tungsten, just move over to a wafter. That's the presentation I'm using here, just a little wafter, and just remove the tungsten completely, and you'll be absolutely fine with that. Now, the next thing, of course, that people struggle with is keeping their hook baits on. Now, hook baits wise, of course, you do have a couple of different options. So you could use a hardened hook bait, and they will obviously stay on perfectly well. Or, as you've just seen, you could just use a couple of grains of plastic maize. Now, how you actually mount these is critical. If you use floss, if you blob, basically what happens is, they can still remove them because they're just not on firm enough. If you're using a pop-up maize or pop-up corn, for example, don't use floss, because basically what they can do, they can get inside the actual two pieces of maize with the sizes and just cut it off, and then you can end up with no rig on there at all. So what I'm using to actually mount my hook baits, which is really important, is braid. That's just uncoated braid, just using it as I would normally with bait floss, but instead of actually blobbing that, I'm just using a bait stop there, and I'm just doing 4 overhand granny knots, tightening them down, trimming off the excess obviously, and then lighting that. And basically what that does, it creates a really, really hard, lighter down braid basically, and there's no way they're getting that off at all. And no matter how much they pull of that, they are never ever going to remove that hook bait. So yeah, that is basically how you beat crayfish. Either use a hardened hook bait or use a little bit of plastic. Now, bait and baiting is extremely important as well. First off, definitely bait up before you put your rigs out. If you put your rigs out first, that is going to be one of the only items that's on the lake bed, and you're just asking for trouble straight away, aren't you? Bait up first. Make sure you've got a nice spread of bait, so just try and spread that bait out as much as possible. I would definitely put in more than you usually would, because they are going to be obviously eating all of the bait, of course. So make sure it's a nice spread, and then once you've baited up, then put your rigs out, and then of course you've got less chance of them pulling at that hook bait. Now, the actual bait mix that I use to get around crayfish issues, you've got loads of little bits in there, and my mix is pretty straightforward. So I start off with 2 scoops of boiler crumb, and this is just from the whole range of DNA. So 2 scoops of boiler crumb, 2 scoops of boilie, and then 2 scoops of hemp, usually dockside mix from carbon, and then 2 scoops of maize. And basically that mix, there's loads of tiny little bits in there. They're going to spend hours and hours and hours rubbing through all of those little bits, which is obviously a lot less chance that they're going to get to that hook bait. But yeah, with your hardened hook baits, just obviously mount those the same. Yeah, and there's no way that they're going to get any of that off. And they've basically just defeated a crayfish. And you'll be reeling in your hook baits either with a carp, or when you're reeling in the morning, of course, you will still have your hook baits on, and all of that frustration and head scratching will just be gone. So that's basically how you defeat the crayfish. Yeah, basically incorporate into that into your own fishing if you are fishing any waters that have a really big crayfish problem. So I hope you found that useful. Thank you very much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to the Trakker YouTube channel.